Professor Seyed Marandi, Chair of American Studies at the University of Tehran, has emerged in recent years as one of the clearest and most educated voices on events in his own region and indeed farther beyond. And we've been lucky from the start of having him regularly on the mother of all talk shows. And he joins us again this evening at what is, to say the very least, Professor, a very delicate moment. How do you see it? And what do you think is going to happen next?
I have no doubt that the Israeli regime will fail in Lebanon. It has failed in Gaza. It has failed over the last year on the border with Lebanon. It has failed in the Red Sea, as we've seen Ansarullah or the Houthis defeat the Americans and continue the blockade. And they've had no real success in the occupied West Bank. Many of us, I think you as well, believed that there was going to be an escalation because Netanyahu is not going to accept a ceasefire. So he has only one way to go, and that is to continue the war or to escalate. And for a person like Netanyahu and his regime, escalation seemed to be what was going to happen. Hezbollah, of course, is much stronger than Islamic Jihad and Hamas combined, and along with their allies. It has a very powerful missile defense force. It is well situated to protect southern Lebanon. Its installations are underground and well protected. So the heavy bombings that the regime has been carrying out in Lebanon has been targeting mainly ordinary people. They want people to, they're killing people and forcing others to leave southern Lebanon in the hope that they can occupy that part of the country or to force Hezbollah to accept a ceasefire. But Hezbollah said from the very beginning that they will only accept a ceasefire if the Israeli regime accepts the terms that are acceptable to Hamas. And so I think it's obvious that a ceasefire in Lebanon is impossible. I just would like to add one thing, and that is that many people during the last year, and I think some of them bad faith actors, have been saying that Hezbollah has done nothing and that Hezbollah is only playing games. Well, if it was playing games, we wouldn't be seeing the atrocities being carried out today in Lebanon. Obviously, Hezbollah was putting a lot of pressure on the Israeli regime, drawing away large amounts of troops, large numbers of troops from Gaza in order to prevent the fall of Gaza. And they've made huge sacrifices during the last year. Now the sacrifices are much greater than ever before. So I think that a lot of people owe an apology to the resistance and the amazing work that they've done. This was not forced upon them. They chose to protect the people of Gaza. They chose to make these sacrifices voluntarily. And I think that history will remember what they did.
The number of sacrifices that they have made, as you implied there, have increased quite dramatically. How devastating is the blow of the killing of very significant figures within Hezbollah in what would appear to be a single targeted bombing in the Dahia in Beirut last week?
Obviously, it was significant, and so was the terrorist act that was carried out through the pagers and the walkie-talkies. But these are not going to change the equation, nor are the atrocities that are being carried out now, which is basically the Israeli regime carrying out, using bunker busters to bomb homes and to slaughter ordinary supporters of the resistance. This is not going to change anything. The resistance has been expecting this war to come, and it is upon them today. As I said, they chose to defend Gaza. and they will continue to defend Gaza. But overwhelmingly, the assets, the important assets of Hezbollah are underground. We saw that Hamas and Islamic Jihad had hundreds of kilometers of tunnels, very sophisticated tunnels, and they still do. And that's the main reason why the Israeli regime has been unable to capture Gaza. And of course, alongside the heroism of the resistance and the people in Gaza who've been supporting them. And the Israeli regime, if I'm sure you recall, during the initial days and weeks, they were saying they were going to pour seawater into the tunnels, and they were going to pour gas into the tunnels, and they were going to flood the tunnels and defeat the resistance. But the tunnels were far more sophisticated. Brilliant engineers were behind this whole complex. And therefore, when Gaza has such a sophisticated defense system and mechanism and infrastructure, you can imagine what exists in Lebanon. It's far greater. And we've already seen a few weeks ago when Hezbollah published a short clip of one of their underground missile networks. So the Israeli regime cannot have access to them. These missiles exist in different complexes across the country. In the south, they have tunnels across that region. The region itself is hilly and mountainous. I'm sure you've been there before many times. It's also, there are forests and trees. It will be extremely difficult for the Israeli regime to push forward. In 2006, Hezbollah, which was much smaller than today, defeated the regime. I have no doubt that the resistance will defeat them today. And I truly believe that the Israeli regime has made a catastrophic mistake by pushing for escalation against Lebanon.
We'll come back to escalation in a minute, but our poll this evening asks if Israel will invade Lebanon, meaning a ground invasion. How would you have voted in that poll, yes or no?
It's very difficult to say. I think that it's quite possible that there will be Israeli troops entering parts of southern Lebanon. I don't think there will be a major invasion. I'm pretty sure that the Israeli regime knows that Hezbollah has a very sound defense infrastructure. And I think Netanyahu knows that the chances for success are very low. But he's doing this in desperation. And his right-wing fanatical supporters, perhaps they have their own calculations. So it is quite possible that they'll enter southern Lebanon, but that is exactly what Hezbollah has been planning for the last 20 years. Their defense capabilities are enormous, and now all of their fighters, all of their soldiers, all of their commandos and commanders, they are based in these centers. Very few people move around in towns and cities. The strike on Beirut was, I guess, unexpected, but I don't think the Israelis are going to have the sort of opportunities like they had before in the coming days and weeks. And Hezbollah has many commanders and young people who've been fighting and who have very good experience and who are very smart and who are very dedicated. I have no doubt that the Israeli regime will recognize the strength of Hezbollah in the coming days and weeks. If they enter Lebanon, that will be, as I said, the biggest mistake that they've ever made. I think they've already made a major mistake because Hezbollah is striking inside Israel. The more they escalate, the worse it's going to get for the regime. And the massacre in Lebanon as well, George, I think you'll agree with me that what happened in Gaza is catastrophic. Perhaps hundreds of thousands of people have died as a result of this genocide, this Holocaust. However, that aside, if you had hundreds of billions of dollars, if George Galloway had hundreds of billions of dollars, I don't think you could have shifted public opinion across the world the way in which it's shifted because of the genocide. And carrying out these atrocities in Lebanon are only going to make it worse for the Israeli regime. So militarily, they haven't won. Their economy is floundering. But in addition to all that, people across the world are saying to themselves that these fiends have slaughtered people in Gaza, and now look what they're doing to the people of Lebanon. And the collective West is going to pay the price for this, because this is all being done in their name, because they are truly behind it.
In the face of this escalation, which Israel, presumably even its best friends, would not deny that this all represents a dramatic escalation. In response, the resistance in Lebanon has the ability to strike a wider variety of targets. They have eschewed the targeting of Israeli civilians, unlike Netanyahu's forces, who just killed in 1.5 days over 600 people, most of whom were women and children. The resistance has not done that, but also it has geographically limited its targeting. It's true that Haifa has now entered the target list. Prior to that, the targeting was considerably in the north of occupied Palestine. Now it's moved a bit, but it has not moved to where it could move. For example, serious attacks on Tel Aviv itself. These have very largely not been targeted. And the other means of escalation, or definitions of escalation, would be if other countries became involved, which is, if you like, the big question on everybody's lips. And I would be deficient in my duty if I did not ask you it. I know you don't speak for Iran, but you are a clever and well-informed observer. When will Iran answer the crimes committed against Iran, and when will it answer the crimes being committed in Lebanon?
First, I'd like to repeat exactly what you were saying, and stress that it's how extraordinary it is that the Israeli regime bombs and carpet bombs different parts of Lebanon, villages and towns. And the Western media, when they report it, they call it Hezbollah sites or Hezbollah strongholds in order to justify the slaughter. Whereas Hezbollah, in response, as you've rightly pointed out, has been focused on military targets. And yet Hezbollah is demonized in the West, and the Israeli regime is somehow justified. Their atrocities are justified by Western diplomats and leaders in the media. With regards to the Iranian response, I have no doubt that the Iranians will respond. And I have no doubt that the Israeli regime will pay a significant price for their atrocities carried out against guests of Iran, meaning martyr Ismail Haniyeh and his companion, but also the Iranian diplomat, the Iranian ambassador in Beirut, who was injured as a result of his pager blowing up in his hand. He was pretty severely wounded. The Israeli regime will pay a price, but Iran is not going to be rushed into making a decision based upon the emotions of the general public. Iran will have one shot at the Israeli regime that will be acceptable across the world, the global south, because it will be in retaliation, and it will be to create deterrence. And the Iranians want to make sure that the Israeli regime pays the maximum price. So first of all, the delay, part of it is because the Israeli regime has been forced to move around infrastructure. It has been forced to, its bureaucrats, its intelligence agencies, its military, they've been forced to take special precautions in their buildings, and so they paid a price. Foreign airlines have halted their flights to Israel or to Palestine. So they've been paying a price, and the Iranians want to maximize that. But also the Iranians want to calculate when is the best time to hit them, when it helps the resistance, the collective resistance in Gaza, in Lebanon, and elsewhere in the most effective way. And I think we should not only remember the fact that the Iranians have paid a huge cost already. The Iranians are not backing away. This is just propaganda made by bad faith actors. Iran has empowered Gaza. Iran has empowered Lebanon. It has empowered Syria, Iraq, and Yemen to stand, and the West Bank increasingly, with the help of Syria, as we all know. That's, Syria plays a key role in all this, and that's why we had the dirty war against Syria. That's what it was all about. People are waking up to the fact that what NATO and client regimes in the region were doing was that they were trying to destroy Syria, so that today, when we have a war, the resistance would be surrounded and they would not be able to get assistance. So Iran will continue its assistance. Iran will continue to support the resistance to make sure the Israeli regime is defeated militarily, economically, and in the eyes of the public opinion across the world. But Iran will strike the regime, and it will punish it. We should have patience. Again, if we go back to those people who are saying Hezbollah is not doing anything, well, if it wasn't doing anything, then why is the Israeli regime carrying out such horrific atrocities? And as you pointed out, murdering almost 600 people in less than 48 hours. I think that Iran is doing what it can, and it will continue to do so. And I think that ultimately the Israeli regime will be defeated. The Iranians are known to be very patient, and they don't make. I think Iranians are an emotional people, but their decisions are not made based on emotions.
What do you think of the thesis advanced actually by a caller on this show tonight, that as Iran, Russia, and China become ever closer with increasing military cooperation, weapons supplies in both directions, and of course a closer economic integration, making a very powerful bloc indeed, but both Russia and China are characterized, certainly in the Middle East, with a cautious approach to these matters. What do you make of the thesis that Russia and China are restraining Iran from a response that it might otherwise have made?
I don't think that Iran makes its decisions based upon the requests of other countries. I don't think that the Russians have asked the Iranians not to respond. I've not heard of that before, and I've not heard the Chinese say that either. Actually, while the Russians and the Chinese have been more cautious, it is interesting that the Chinese ask its citizens to leave Israel or Palestine and Lebanon. This affects the Israeli regime much more than it does Lebanon because of the large economic role that China plays. And this is a vote of no confidence of sorts with regards to this Israeli regime. Russia has its hands full in Ukraine, although it has the upper hand, and I think the West has too much on its plate, and that's one reason why they're failing both in Gaza and in Ukraine, and they will fail elsewhere. And I think it's not just Iran, Russia, and China. I think the global South is the notion of Israel being an illegitimate apartheid and ethno-supremacist regime is growing across the global South. It goes beyond just 1, 2, 3, or 4 countries. Although they don't have one ethnicity, they're European and they come from different parts of the world. The Palestinians are more Semite than the Zionists in Palestine. But in any case, I think that the cooperation between Iran, Russia, and China is growing, especially Iran and Russia. And I think that this is something to be welcomed. But also, I think cooperation across the global South is growing. And also alongside this, I think pressure is building on countries that are not taking the steps that they should. In other words, as the genocide continues in Gaza and genocidal attacks take place in Lebanon, the pressure is simply going to build against people like Erdogan, who continue to do business and trade with Israel, and who continue to allow oil from the Republic of Azerbaijan, cheap oil, to get to Israel to help the war machine, or Jordan, or Egypt, or the Emirates. All of those countries that are in bed with the regime are going to be increasingly facing pressure. And while things look calm today, and I think I may have said this once before, while things look calm today in much of the Arab world, we all remember what happened in Tunisia a little over a decade ago, when one man in protest burned himself alive. The whole of North Africa and West Asia erupted. And I think the situation today is far more difficult for the Americans and its client regimes. It's far more difficult today than it was back then.
Professor Marandi, a wonderful tour of the horizon as usual. Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows.